African Interest Group of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. My name is Octavio Goyo. I'm originally from Angola, but I'm happy that we have a very diverse audience from basically people from all over the world. So welcome. And so I serve as the chair of the African Interest Group, and I'm a visiting attorney at the Environmental Law Institute. I am one of the co-chairs of this session alongside Kanta.
Thank you, Octavio. My name is Kanta Kumari Rigo, and I am a lead environmental specialist at the World Bank. And I work particularly with the Africa region on climate adaptation. So very happy to be here as well.
That's good, Kanta. We are glad that you are here. You joined us. So I want to very briefly to thank some people. I would like to express my note of gratitude, obviously, to Carl Brook, the president of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association, and the team. We have a team. The African Interest Group has a team. It's not one person. We have a group of people, and there is a planning team that help to organize events like this one. I would like to thank Elaine Chow and Useni Kalilu, Emily Sample, and who are the team who help events for the Africa Interest Group. And so I also want to thank other people who contributed for this particular event, like Tracy Hart. Even I want to especially mention Fabian Rothman. Fabian, I would like you to give some words so that people can see that you are our technical assistance support here. Please give a few words here for us.
Yes, I don't want to take too much time from the interesting discussions ahead, but I'll be facilitating the conference. And if there's any troubles, please send me a direct message.
That's good. Thank you, Fabian. So that's very good. So Fabian is in charge of the Zoom. He is managing all the technical aspects of it. So now I would like to give a few words for our president, the president of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. And he has been very supportive. We are very grateful for his leadership and his example. And so, Carlos, please, it's over to you.
Thank you, Octavio, and my congratulations for pulling together such an amazing panel. It is interesting because I know most of the institutions represented here by the speakers. And it reinforces a point that we've said a number of times through this conference, and that's the number of people working on environment, conflict, and peace is really incredibly broad. And many people are doing environmental peace building without even really calling it that or referring it to that way. And I think that it's going to be a very interesting discussion because you're all coming at this, whether it's more from the peace side or the water side or the community side. And this is such an interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, transsectoral field that it really requires a lot of different viewpoints and skill sets. And so really looking forward to this discussion and want to express my appreciation also to Kanta for agreeing to co-chair this. Back to the chairs.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for really nailing what this session is about. And as you said, we have a very distinguished panel from all geographies and parts of the continent. I'll take a couple of minutes to introduce them very briefly. First of all, for the North Africa region, we have His Excellency Ambassador Ahmed Abdulatif. He's the Director General of the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding. He hails from Egypt. And then from Central Africa, we have Hindu Omaru Ibrahim. She's the co-chair of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change and comes from Chad. And in East Africa, we have His Excellency Ambassador Fred Ngoga Gateretse. He's the head of the focal point, International Partnerships, Department of Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the African Union Commission, and he comes himself from Burundi. Great. And from West Africa, we have Dr. Catherine Nwajaku Dahu, Director of Programs, Politics and Governance, and co-director of the Center of the Study of Armed Groups, Overseas Development Institution from Nigeria. And last but not least, from Southern Africa, we have Desigan Naidu, member of the South African Presidential Climate Commission and Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Security Studies from South Africa. I'm sure that all of you will totally agree that this is the sterling set of discussants that we're going to hear from the field itself and from their broader experiences. Over to you, Octavio, if you can walk us through the agenda.
That's good. Thank you, Kanta. This agenda, our event will be divided in basically three main parts. We are going to have very briefly, we are going to have I would say climate. We're going to have to talk about briefly answer some core questions for the first part, and then for the second part, we're going to talk about engage in a dialogue where we're going to have all discussants focus on specific principles, and then people also will have opportunity to ask some questions. But before that, I want to say something very important. So this event here, this session, is related to the road to Geneva. So this conference was supposed to be in Geneva, but because of the COVID, so now we are virtual online. So, but I'm saying road to Geneva because it is a road. There was a preparation for it. So we had this session here. We had an event in November, and that event was a preparation for this one. So the things that we have here didn't come from nowhere. So come from there. We had that event in November with around 40 speakers from over 20 different countries, and was also very diverse, a little bit informal, different format. And that event helped to design this session for this conference, second international conference on environmental peacebuilding. So this is very important to understand the background where we come from. So, and in terms of the scope, the objective of our discussion. So that's what I'm gonna say right now. So climate change is known as a threat multiplier. So climate change doesn't necessarily cause conflict. So there are different ways for people to, like in the literature, sometimes people focus on to finding the problems. It's good to understand, to learn what are the problems. But for us here, we are not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on the solution. It's a different approach. So we want to know what is working. So we have great speakers here, and we're going to have opportunity to learn from them or with them, and to see some of the options. I will try to follow strictly about the time here, the schedule, because I don't have much time to go to much details. But then that's what we are going to talk. We're going to specifically. So our focal point is to discuss elements that help support sustainable peace based on each discussed examples of cooperation around climate change, adaptation, or mitigation in Africa. So more details about it, you will see, because my first question, our first round will be just to introduce you to the topic, to the problems. So let's see, let's start with the first question. Before we go to the examples, that's to the discuss. I'm gonna start with the Hindu and the Ambassador Fred Ngoga for this first question. So before we go to your specific example, let's have a quick round of comments on what do you see to be the key challenge or problem with respect to climate change, security risks, and violent conflicts. Please give us your topic 3 points or red lines in one line or maximum two, what do you see as a problem? So we want to, we have a diversity, so we want to understand briefly what's the problem, what are the problems? Hello, Indu.
Sure. So thank you very much. And yeah, the first question is tough, but let me try. So the first point is we can all agree climate change is becoming a big threat in Africa, and especially when we talk about my region and in Chad. So we are seeing the season that change a lot. The rainy season become more and more shorter, either with heavy rain that flood all the places, like the case of 2020, where even in the cities, people take the canoe. Or the year before, ending by the drought, when we saw also the World Food Program showed the food insecurity is increasing more in Chad and all around the regions. So this is a big threat. The consequence of it, this is the second point. It's creating conflict between the communities because we are seeing the resources that shrinking. Of course, I'm not going to paint the picture of the Lake Chad who lose 90% of his water, but imagine if the bigger lake lose 90% of his water, how about the smaller lake that exist? I witnessed it myself. So many smaller lakes that disappear forever. And these resources leading to the conflict between the communities. The recent one is the one in Cameroon, just across the river from Chad in Kusiri. It is over a water point that the community fight each other, more than 18 dead. And we have still to today where I'm talking now, we have more than 30,000 displaced and refugees across in Chad, and where they are humanitarian supporting them. The third one is, this conflict is leading also to migration. I'm not talking about the international migration, jumping through the sea, coming to the Europe. I'm talking about the internal migration where community live from one region to another one. And then it's create another kind of conflict between the communities that fighting over the resources because they have all to host the new coming. I stop here.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful to learn about what is happening in Chad related to climate change. So let's go to Ambassador Fred Ngoga.
Thank you so much, Octavio, for having me. I'm juggling two meetings at the same time because, as you know, we're having the AU Executive Council Summit. So I think my sister Hindu has just so eloquently talked about really, what is happening not only in the Lake Chad Basin, but for us, we're seeing it in the Sahel. We're seeing it even in Central Africa. We're seeing it in many of the continent, the 5 areas of the continent. I can tell you that we recently commissioned a study with UNEP just to find out what are the natural resources that were in dispute. In fact, we have even a jargon that we say among our colleagues that show me a conflict and I'll show you a natural resource in dispute. And what climate change is doing, it's becoming a threat multiplier. And when you look at all there are 5 key natural resources that we have found to be at the heart of the conflicts. One is land. Land, as Hindu said, because of the high temperatures and because of the changing patterns, people are migrating. And when they migrate, they arrive in a community and they put strain on already limited resources. So that creates a problem. The second natural resources that is causing a lot of problems is, of course, minerals. Minerals, because this is something that it's for livelihoods and so on. And so community, when they get displaced, they arrive in an area, so they fight over minerals. Of course, oil as well is one natural resources that we found to be, causing problems. The fourth one was water, as Hindu said, and then the fifth was fisheries. These are the 5 natural resources that we're finding to be problematic. But I wanted to say that in the African Union, we already recognize that it's a threat multiplier and it's a threat to our continental agenda. We have had 8 sessions of the AU Peace and Security Council dedicated squarely on this issue. And I can tell you, right now we're focusing more on how to mitigate. So what are we doing to mitigate? First and foremost, it's leadership and governance matters. We say leadership and governance matters, and we trust in science. This is something that that is important to us. Number 2, as we discuss mitigation, we should ensure that the response that we're giving also do not cause more harm. What do I mean by this? When we are creating programs, effective climate security policy should be driven by the principle of collective security and the responsibility to respond and protect. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. As we come up with these programs,
Ambassador, just
sure.
Ambassador, sorry.
Or maybe I will talk about this later.
Yes, exactly. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Good.
Yes, we're gonna have time to go deeper. That's very important. We're trying to follow the schedule strictly. Thank you, Ambassador, and I appreciate your understanding about that. But if you wanna give like your last 30 seconds to finish your thoughts, please go ahead.
Sure. No, the thought that I was trying to drive across is that we know the threat, we know how to respond, but a new phenomenon we're seeing is that even as we craft these responses, we're seeing that these responses sometimes they cause harms in themselves, and that really dealing with climate, the challenges of climate peace and security, it should start at the community level, at the national level, at the regional level, and at the continental level. So I'll stop here and I'll elaborate more as we go further into details.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much. That's very good to give a good overview of what's happening in the continent. Over to you, Kanta.
Thank you very much, Hindu and Ambassador Frederick, for walking us through those big issues, right? And the challenges, and you can already see this thread that goes from the bottom to the top and back again. Let me turn to Des again to add his quick thoughts on what you see to be the problem or the challenges, the key challenge. If you just articulate that we will then go into the next section on.
Thank you, colleagues. I think you have seen that I went from light into darkness, and in many unexpectedly, but in many ways reflecting what a lot of this continent has to deal with on a daily basis. Insecurity around energy supply, and this is one of the fundamental issues associated with the fact that this continent is indeed one of the victims of global climate change in the most extreme way, in spite of the fact that it contributes a minuscule part of the emissions globally. I just want to start at a slightly different point and talk to the threat to the global economy as a whole. The World Economic Forum put out its global risk register in January this year, and lo and behold, the top 3 risks and 50% of the top 10 risks are associated with climate change. The top 3 being our inaction around climate change and the inability to move rapidly enough with our responses, globally, that is. We're talking about extreme weather, and this is a major phenomenon on the African continent as a whole, and in my part of the continent, in Southern Africa. Droughts and high energy storms and floods have become the order of the day. And there is, of course, biodiversity loss. And biodiversity, for the longest time, has been a point of resilience capture in the African continent. And the loss of that biodiversity is threatening everything, including our food security. And just to repeat some of the comments coming from the colleagues, that the phenomena we are seeing is loss of livelihoods. The loss of livelihoods has implications in a couple of directions, 2 of them being mass migration. And while the migration from Africa into Europe is what makes the media and the headlines, intra-African migration is immense. Your own organization, Kanta, the World Bank, estimates that we are currently approaching about 100 million people who are in forced migration on the back of climate change in the African continent. The other angle around this is the local conflicts that are escalating into national conflict. In fact, one of the analyses that is being discussed right now is the association between unconstitutional government changes, like in West Africa most recently, on the back of climate change, resource scarcity, fueling tribal conflict, organizing for general instability, which is leading to political instability around the continent. So we have an extremely serious issue on the African continent with regards to climate change and environmental issues being the issues of conflict and a conflict accelerator, as the ambassador pointed out. I'll pause there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Desigan. And let me now turn to Dr. Catherine. Catherine, your quick thoughts on this big picture. It's very bleak, but let's hear from you on that before we go to the solutions in the next round.
Yes, I'm not sure if I'll make a contribution to it appearing less bleak. I would very much agree with many of what my colleagues have already put on the table. I would say at the same time that if we are to find solutions to this complex set of problems, we do need analytical clarity. And I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I would say that whilst we can speak about threat multiplier, climate change being a threat multiplier, I would like to also put on the table other possible multipliers, okay? Because the way in which resources are used or have been used can also be a contributing factor. And I think it's really important to disentangle what is about climate change and what is about resource use. Often, and unfortunately, these problems and their manifestations get intertwined. I'd like to just say one thing about resource use, and speaking very much from the Niger Delta, Nigeria's Niger Delta, where oil and gas, the fossil fuel industry, have also contributed immensely to environmental devastation, but also climate change through gas flaring, but also through dredging. So we often think of flooding, the immense floods that the Niger Delta suffers, increasingly at levels previously unseen, as the result of climate change. However, they are also the result of dredging practices with very limited or non-existent regulation that have not taken biodiversity, ecology into account. And as a result, in conjunction with all the climate change related factors, have exacerbated a situation that we're referring to globally as climate change. And I think we just need to kind of dissect, because if we dissect effectively what the problem is, then we can actually fashion solutions which target those responsible in a way likely to bring about some change. So I'll just say those two things to add to the conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for highlighting the critical need for robust diagnostics and sort of really unpacking the governance, institutional, and management challenges. I think that's really important. Last but not least, let me turn to Ambassador Ahmed Atalatev to add his voice to the set of issues that we are all grappling with. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to join this distinguished set of speakers. And I think my previous speakers already made very good points about climate change being a threat multiplier, the impact on constrained resources. But maybe the point I would like to highlight and to add on this discussion is that we really cannot deal with this issue in isolated from the broader context of fragility and vulnerability in many of the countries of our continent. So the challenge, desertification, droughts, floods, etc., is already impacting countries that are experiencing conflict, terrorism, displacement, humanitarian crisis, food insecurity. So there is a conjunction of risks and threats occurring simultaneously, and that is the fundamental challenges to the ability of these countries to deal simultaneously with these interconnected risks at the same time. And it's what the Secretary General in his report and the Common Agenda called cascading risks. So in our responses, this is something we need to be carefully aware on. We're not crafting responses just on climate, etc., that do not factor in, the conflict, the security aspect, might not be as effective as we want, or the resource aspect or other aspects that I mentioned. So we really need to develop holistic responses that are able to deal with the complexity and the interconnectedness with the challenges and the risks I'm talking about. And I joined then the last speaker about, and the key for that is to have is governance and institutional capabilities, and that is a fundamental weakness in many countries who are confronted with these challenges, and without the capacities, the institutions, the planning, the skills, the human resources, the leadership, the capacity and institutional building, much of trying to deal with these issues will probably not be in a sustainable manner that we want on a long-term basis to address the root causes of fragility and vulnerability. At the end of the day, that is what makes, all other countries in the world are also confronted with climate change, but they do not experience the same level of vulnerability and fragility that many of these countries experience. So I would just add this point to already the very good points that have been made by previous speakers. And of course, that has implications for the responses we might look at later.
Thank you so much. I see that.
Go ahead, Octavio.
Yes, I see that Catherine and Ambassador Ahmed, they are ahead. They are already looking for the solutions with the first hand. It's good that it links us to this second part of the event, where we're going to focus on that more, so about the solution. So people are eager for the solution, which is very good. It's very good. That's what we are looking for here. For now, we're gonna have something more relate to that more here. So now let's go to this again. So this again, you have a solid background on water cooperation. So cooperation is one of the key elements of the Paris Agreement, but the Paris Agreement does not provide a definition of what is cooperation. Similarly, we have cooperation is addressed in the 2030 agenda and in the African Union Agenda 2063 without a definition. Sometimes it's a little bit confused, it's not very clear. So in terms of the difference, for example, with the agenda, 2030 agenda, it's not very clear the difference between cooperation, collaboration, partnership, and it seems like sometimes they use this word in the same. So it's very important for this first round here, to understand the conceptual aspect so that we understand what we are talking about. So that's what we are doing right now. So this again, what is cooperation in the context of these three documents?
Well, it's those three documents and several others, because I mean, one of the acceleration points around the whole notion of partnership and cooperation came from the WSSD, which Africa hosted actually in 2002. And then it's been carried through over time, and 20 years later, we now see it firmly embedded as part of the global acceleration framework for the SDGs around moving to 2030, and now with the notion of the housing of governance. And I think although those documents are not prescriptive enough to provide the templates and the formulas, we can borrow from what they mean. And I think they're talking to three things that we need to emphasize. The first of those things is that we need to organize for all of the social partners in the system to be sufficiently agentized to participate in the decision-making that we are looking for. And this is absolutely key, because in the climate change domain in general, in the environmental domain in general, the most vulnerable populations around the world and this continent are the poorest of the poor in general. But if you have to push them into pockets, it would be rural poor, and it will be rural poor women in particular. So the vulnerability factor is a big factor, to emphasize what Ambassador Ahmed had mentioned earlier. So the agentization is the one part. The second part around it is the interinstitutional cooperation that needs to occur. So it is very pleasing to note that the African Union has organized to have its special session in November last year around the theme talking to the climate development security nexus. And this is a very, very powerful thing. It's about taking the major agendas on the continent and looking for their points of connectivity in the interinstitutional arrangements and organize for us to draw from the resources in those different domains, because individually they are resource poor, to make a meaningful difference. And the third part is the upper level of that is, what is your governance regime? How does your governance system organize itself to not only prioritize these issues, but move this agenda forward beyond the preamble? I think one of the things that the world is exhausted with is the rhetoric around every one of the COPs that we have had around climate change, around the CBD, around the Convention for Desertification, and then it gets threadbare when it comes to the implementation. So the implementation has to find its space with an enunciation and a fulling out of those cooperation in the form of those three factors that I mentioned, which then bring in resources and investments to actually make those agreements live and breathe.
Yes, no, I think that's really very useful, Desigan, I think, to set out the parameters, for cooperation. I'd like to bring in Ambassador Ahmed Atalatev, and, for him to share some of his experience. Ambassador, the institution that you lead, right? The Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping, and Peacebuilding, has done good and relevant work related to this link between climate change and security. And so could you share with us, based on the experience that you have, on the insights that really hone in on that nexus between climate change, cooperation, conflict, and peace? I mean, that sort of nexus that Desigan referred to.
Yes, thank you, and I'm happy to share a bit some of the highlights of the work we are doing. I mean, we're an institution that works mostly on capacity building with African countries, and I will address kind of two priorities we've had. One on capacity building and strengthening capacities, and that is one of the areas that was mentioned in the communiqué of the African Union Peace and Security Council meeting in November, that was mentioned by my predecessor, that there is a pressing need to strengthening African capacities to be able to deal with this issue in a cohesive, integrated manner. So we are currently finalizing a training manual on climate responsive programming for sustaining peace in Africa. And I think it would be quite interesting and among the first efforts to develop such a custom-made program for African officials that seeks to enhance the knowledge and understanding of these officials on assessing and responding to climate threats in an integrated and inclusive manner, based on two very important principles that have to be part of our responses, which is national and local ownership and contextualization. So this is fundamental to tailor-made our responses to the specific circumstances of our different local and community settings. So that is in the terms of capacity building and strengthening capacities. Now, the second aspect is the one I mentioned in my initial intervention on and this interface between climate, peace, and security, and bring together these different worlds that works on peace and on climate. And in this context, our center is also the secretariat of a forum called the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development. And this forum precisely seeks to strengthening the nexus between sustainable development and peace. And we are increasingly looking at climate change in that context. For instance, looking at how climate finance can be mobilized for sustaining peace, looking at the nexus between climate and displacement and what it has as implications for sustaining peace. And we should have this year, in the coming month, the third aim to bring together these two agendas in Africa and to further articulate, the kind of holistic and integrated response we need to address these challenges. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And now let's move a little bit. Let's move to Catherine. In addition to your experience, Catherine, you have written extensively on the interlink between conflict and peace. So again, we're coming back about this conceptual aspect. So we want to understand that we are talking about sustainable peace, and that's what the ambassador was trying to highlight also, and you also in the beginning in terms of some important elements that in terms of solutions, what we need to do. So could you please share what is sustaining peace, what is sustainable peace? These are very important terms that I think is for all of us to understand. Could you please share with that?
Thank you very much. I'd be happy to share with you the perspective that we've been using in my organization, in the past organizations I've been working with, in terms of how we understand sustainable peace. Really, someone referred earlier, I think it was Ambassador, to root causes. And so our understanding of any peace enterprise is about seeking to address the root causes. So beyond peace agreements, but really looking at the structural drivers of conflict, which are about access, inclusion, and voice. Okay, I used to be part of an enterprise which was called the International Dialogue on Peacebuilding and State Building. I headed the secretariat of that outfit for many years, and it was a group that brought together the governments of some 23 countries affected by conflict and fragility and members of the international donor community. And they forged something called the New Deal for international engagement in fragile environments. And I believe it continues to be an important reference point in terms of breaking down what sustainable peace is really. So it had 5 basic core principles, which were basically, first of all, inclusive politics. So acknowledging that peace agreements beyond the architecture was also about ensuring inclusiveness. I think somebody mentioned that before. So inclusive politics. Secondly, justice. Okay, so we're back to that governance, the importance of a governance agenda where justice, and acknowledging their contested notions of what that means, needs to be up front and center of any ambition to create sustainable peace. Okay, justice. The third area was around access to services, access, enabling the majority to actually see the benefits of a peace building agenda. So ensuring that access to services was also part and parcel of it. Next, I mean, the last 2 areas escaped me, but there were 2 other very important pillars, which were essentially about acknowledging that any peace needs to be about building institutions that can anchor legitimacy and therefore enable peace to be more than just the agreement. So the point I would make is that, and this links back to what the last speaker just said, when we can't think of any solution for addressing the climate crisis we're in that doesn't bring in fragile contexts, this very clear and deep understanding of addressing the fundamental causes. We already have global frameworks at our disposal. Anyone operating, even outside the climate space, is aware of some of these very basic principles. I think the challenge is to see how, instead of reinventing the wheel, we draw on these principles that have been articulated as important and necessary, and see how we can integrate them into our attempts to look at how to promote climate mitigation or adaptation in fragile contexts. So I think we have what we need. It's a question of also, my final point would be a question of understanding. I painted a beautiful picture of this wonderful framework that exists, but I also know from the inside how very difficult it was to implement, because different sectoral people work in silos, and there are vested interests in not necessarily cooperating along those lines. So I think using the frameworks at our disposal, but also learning the lessons of why it's been difficult to implement, is also very critical to being able to forge a conflict-sensitive approach to mitigation and adaptation in fragile environments. Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much,
Dr. Catherine.
Just a second, Kanta, sorry. I just want to highlight, this is very important. So we were in the first part where we spoke about the problems. In the second part is conceptual aspect where we are now. And these pillars, these 5 pillars that Catherine mentioned, that's what will guide us for the next session. It's over to you, Kanta.
No, absolutely. That's what I was going to say. That, I mean, I think if we've set out a really nice conceptual framework, we've heard also from Ambassador Ahmed about the need to customize it to build capacity, and we heard about the cooperation elements from Desigan. What we'd like to do now in this session is really probe deeper into the solution space and experiences. And here, what we'd like to do is start off with Ambassador Fred, right? Ambassador, Somalia, where you have experience, is known to be one of the most affected countries by climate change in the world. In fact, in the ND-GAIN index, it's ranked 173 out of 182. It's really got limited capacities and high vulnerabilities. We know that you are a former senior officer with the Africa Union mission in Somalia, and also the former head of the Conflict Prevention and Early Warning Division at the African Union Commission. Could you share with us a positive example of cooperation around climate actions in Somalia? Over to you, Ambassador. If you could turn on your camera, that would be better, if the bandwidth allows. I'm not hearing Ambassador Fred. Great. And you're on mute. So if you unmute yourself and share with us the Somalian experience. Thank you
so much. I think that there is 2 things that I would like to say vis-a-vis the Somali experience. Number one is you need local ownership. So we worked very closely with the communities to see how we could mitigate drought. And these challenges are so enormous that not one single organization or single groups actually can do it alone. You really need different people to come together to work on it. Number 3, you need government leadership as well. Because if you don't have government leadership, whether it's a good or bad government, it doesn't matter, but you still do need them, because if they are not there, then others will get involved. Yesterday, I think I had mentioned how we had, Al-Shabaab, which was organizing drought committees in some of the areas. And I'm sure that, and they were even more efficient actually than the government. You will even find that, I heard my sister, she was talking about Niger Delta and elsewhere. You will find that all these groups, which are non-state entities, they're also getting involved because they realize the challenges of this. The other thing is coordination. Working together is one thing, but being well coordinated is always a challenge. Why? Because everybody talks about coordination, but no one wants to be coordinated. And this has been a challenge that we've seen across the board. Last but not least, stopgap measures or patches as solutions don't work. Eventually, you fall back into the same problems that you started with. I really liked what my sister Catherine said about analytical clarity, because this issue of climate change, it is true, it is there, but the way our resources have also been used have also created a lot of conflicts. I mentioned the 5 conflicts that the 5 natural resources, and I joked about how we like to say that show me a conflict and I'll show you a natural resource in dispute. That this is a reality that we have to contend with, and the more we actually have clarity in terms of what we're dealing with, the better it is. Let me conclude with just one point here, which I think is extremely important. At the AU level, we have decided that we are going to appoint a special envoy on climate peace and security. And right now, we are actually, the process is undergoing. And what we are trying to do is to create a strategy for him. And a strategy for him, it will start with a report that really looks at this issue holistically. And then from there, he will develop a strategy. We have also decided to create a fund that is specifically going to be addressing some of these issues. It will be a fund that will be owned, and a fund that will be African owned and funded. And I think actually this Saturday during the summit, there will be a report presented on this by President Uhuru Kenyatta, if I'm not mistaken. Then there is something else that we're doing, which is extremely important. We have decided to mainstream climate peace and security within the continental early warning system. This is important. Why? Because our continental early warning system is linked to the regional early warning systems, but also national early warning systems. And the more we help our countries to develop their own national early warning systems, the better we will be. So these are some of the points that I thought that I should put to you as I'm enjoying listening to others. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think you really touched on the key elements. I was going to have a follow-on to you to sort of say whether there were any specific things that stood out in terms of cooperative measures that can really help to sustain peace. And I know you touched on the early warning systems, but are there any others, just quick ones that you want to add that sort of you think solidify sustainable peace over time and space?
You know, interestingly, as much as climate peace and security is a threat multiplier, I see it also as an opportunity to bring people around something that concerns our common humanity. And one of the things that we have seen in the case of Somalia and elsewhere is that, for example, you had 2 clans which have been fighting forever and a day, but they all realize that if they don't work together to address drought, they will all perish. So I think that bringing to the fore our common humanity as well, when it comes to this issue, may actually be an opportunity for us to build better and stronger. And I think there is this word that we like a lot in, which is ubuntu in Africa. Those who know ubuntu, which is I'm my brother and my sister's keeper. So, and if I don't do well, you will not do well as well. So that's what I can say.
Very nice. No, that is really nice. And in fact, I'd like then to turn to Hindu. I think Hindu is all this really solid bottom-up ground experience. And Hindu, we know that you're from the Mbororo community from Chad, right? And how seriously we've heard it from you from different fora, how they are affected by climate change. And what I wanted to hear from you was, to share with us an example of cooperation in which it's building around the knowledge, the indigenous but sort of precious knowledge of your communities, to the point of what Ambassador just said, right? It's one and one, all for one. Could you share that with us?
Sure. I think it's really perfect what Ambassador Frederick said. You can't build a sustainable peace without the peoples who are getting affected. They are the first one concerned, but of course the role of others like government and others can come. So in our case, just like my last experience that I share with you, it was in December. So before Christmas, we ended one of the exercises that I really love. It's a 2D participatory mapping. So you can build a 3D the place where you have a hills, mountains, but you can also build a 2D, but it is a participatory mapping, and it is combining the science knowledge, traditional knowledge of the communities, and technology. So it is really a big key preventers and then peace builders. So the exercise, you need, of course, the satellite map. So we have a satellite images of the place over 2,000 kilometers squares. And then we have all the communities that live around the place. We started the exercise by 24 communities only. And we ended up by 101 because of the importance of this exercise over only 2 weeks. So the community come through the map, they put the exact knowledge that they have. So you have the satellite map, but for them, they know exactly better than the satellite map. Where is the resources that they do know? From the water point to the agriculture areas, to the corridor of movement of cattle, to the stopping points of the cattle over different seasons, and also to the trees, who are the cosmetic trees, the medicinal trees, and the forests that communities use are the sacred trees. That, of course, in Africa, you know that they are a sacred trees, that no one touch them, no one cut the branch, and no one like sit down also there over some time, some hours. And those kind of trees, we do not touch them because they are very important for our environment to keep us healthy also. So community come without going to school. This is the most important part. They come over, have a platform, sit down together between farmers, fishermen, pastoralists, and talk for the first time. And then they identify the result, the solutions them own self. So now the next step after you design all the map is you have to take the picture to digitalize the map, to do not let it to be only an oral. And when you digitalize, it can stay forever. So what we are going to do now, it's from the result of the map to have a conventions between all those over 100 communities. And those conventions can have different chapters, how they can treat, they mitigate the conflict over resources when it's happened in a peaceful manner, how they can better manage and restore the ecosystem that are degraded around the place, and how they can pass the traditional knowledge over generations by sharing with other communities there, because environment is for everyone. And then they can keep those kind of conventions in addition to the digitalized map, and each communities can use it. And of course, they can resolve it even if there is no government who can act, because we know that when there is nomination of the government, they change. Over election, they change, but the community stay there forever. So this is really the best example I can share with you. And the nice thing, you can also duplicate this exercise in any kind of ecosystem. You can do it in Africa, but you can do it also outside Africa. You can do it in indigenous communities, but you can do it also in a local communities outside. So we can use that for sustaining peace, managing the natural resources. But the last point on it, we cannot only build this kind of tools at the community and leave it there. So how we can use it to build a right policies at the national level, and how we can build these right policies can inform the international negotiations. So those are also the bridge we are doing. So we have the Paris Agreement who recognize the indigenous people's knowledge through the Article 7.5, but we have also the Decision 135 who create the platform of the local communities and indigenous people's knowledge exchange. So how our countries can use those kind of examples, but make it for sustaining the entire regions and manage the resources in the peaceful way.
Thank you so much, Hindu. That's excellent, and which is related also to the next question. But before going to the next question, I would like to, we are a little behind in terms of schedule, and I like to follow the schedule strictly. So I want to remind, please, let's try to be a little, I know that it's hard, to be brief in our answers, and so that we can follow. Like we're like something like 30 or 15 minutes behind, almost like in terms of schedule. So let's try to be that's for all speakers. So that we have been behind like for 20 minutes ago. But and that's a very excellent Hindu what you said, which is related to this question in terms of the factors. So are there any factors that help support sustainable peace or prevent conflicts based on the example? Although you already mentioned some of the elements, but could you mention some more factors that help to sustain peace or prevent conflict based on the example that you...
So the only thing that I can say, we cannot just respond after the conflict, so that cannot sustain. You know, when there is conflict, the first response is the humanitarian response. And then the second response is the military response. So we need a third pillar. The third pillar is the development for those communities, because we are talking also about the climate change impact. So at the international level, the national level, they must add these third pillars. Development must accompany all the humanitarian and all the military. So we never saw that a gang fill a stomach of someone who is hungry. It's not work at all. So someone who is hungry needs to build his own future based in his own development. And we get these resources because we have a lot of young people. So let us invest on those young people to give them the development, access to information, to education, to health and entrepreneurship. And then they cannot be only going to the school and waiting for the government office to work. They can do their own entrepreneurship and they can develop their own places. And that can sustain the peace immediately in any kind of conflict that we are facing.
Wow, that's very interesting. It's very hard to read that in the literature. But it really makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful. So let's move on to this again, and this again, which is so there's the Orange Sengu River Basin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly. A transborder resource shared by Botswana, Namibia, Lesotho, and South Africa has been affected by climate security risks. Could you share insights on actions of cooperation around climate change adaptation that supports sustainable peace in this area?
Certainly, but before I go to that, let me just applaud Hindu's example. I found it absolutely inspiring how you could build from that community base, from that very vulnerable, marginalized base, a model that can transform entire systems. And I do believe you are right, in the most sustainable way. And there are many examples like that all around the continent. And I think maybe we should take the trouble to start documenting that, because I think it will not only just inspire people, but it will actually activate change. But to come to your question, Octavio, you know, water is an interesting thing. It's something that has been the source of conflict for the longest time. It is part of our history and the history of conflict. And yet water can be an incredible peacemaker as well, as we also see. In fact, Mark Twain used to say that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And if you look at the water conflicts in his part of the world, inside the United States and between the United States and Mexico, you can see how that is true. Now, on the African continent, we have quite a range. I mean, we have high levels of conflict, very topical areas of conflict in some parts of the world. The Nile Basin is an example of an ongoing and hopefully one that is converging towards solutions, but something that has been going on for millennia, actually. And then you have, in the Southern African context, a bunch of basin agreements that are starting to look like they're standing the test of time. And there's something called Blue Peace Cooperation Index, which actually ranks the Southern African cooperation agreements and treaties and institutions like Orasacom for the Orange River, like Limcom for the Limpopo River, like Kabwa for the Komati River, that has sustained a very stable kind of peace in a part of the world that had many other conflicts associated with it, especially during the struggle against apartheid. But you are right. In spite of that old stability and around the economic dependence on water in the region, just to put out a statistic that in South Africa, which is the hegemon in that region, 60% of the surface water in South Africa is in fact international water. So South Africa has to make these agreements work. And the surrounding countries are doing the same. And they're not restricting it to surface water as well. Hey? Groundwater governance has now become a very big issue. And UNESCO has pulled out in its Greta initiative, Southern Africa and the shared aquifer between South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana as one of the primary examples on new governance arrangements and how those cooperation agreements can work. But the challenge factor is coming up rapidly, and that is around how we deal with climate change, because climate change has introduced two things in that part of the world with regards to the river system. One is floods and the other is droughts. And Southern Africa has had its most intense El Nino episode in more than 100 years, and it's really tested the system. The three factors that fall out of this thing immediately to make it work is, one is that there is a collective understanding, and those treaties are actually binding, and the institutional arrangements and the capacities are actually binding.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. Now, because of the time, I will just try to ask you to give your final maybe 40 seconds, because we need to be strict about the time. You can come up in the second part of this session.
No, absolutely. No, that's a fair point. What I want to emphasize is that formalizing the institutional arrangements is key. The second issue is funding those instruments to make them functional, because this is something that's lacking in many other parts of the continent and in many other parts of the world. And the three is to have sufficient technical capacity and data and scientific systems to actually make the benefit sharing work and the allocations of water work in a scientific way. I'll pause there.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, you can come back later. So let's, for Ambassador Ahmed, actually before Catherine, Bayelsa is, I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly, this name of the state is Bayelsa. Bayelsa state in Nigeria is known as one of the most affected by climate change in Nigeria. So as you are the chair of the Bayelsa State Oil and Environmental Commission's experts working group in Nigeria, could you briefly share if there are any actions of cooperation around climate change adaptation or mitigation that support sustainable peace in this region or in the state?
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, it's difficult to make those links because the Bayelsa State Oil and Environmental Commission is, set up as a state-driven mechanism, which, Bayelsa is one of 36 states in Nigeria. And so this commission is really, its purpose is to basically do a fact-finding investigation as to why and how oil pollution, oil and gas, fossil fuel pollution in the state has become systemic, right? The report will be released hopefully this year, and basically concludes with a set of recommendations about how cleanup and prevention of this systemic pollution crisis due to poor regulation that's been a pattern for the last 60 years, how this needs to be packaged within a post-oil future for Nigeria. So not just cleanup and restoration, but that framed within an idea that oil and gas is on the oil certainly is on the decline in terms of Nigeria, its proportion of Nigeria's income, and we need, for climate change reasons, to be looking towards what comes next. And what comes next is about renewables, it's about adaptation, nature-based solutions, and so on. It's very much a recommendation stage, so it's difficult to say exactly how it would would fit within the cooperation model, but I would just say two things. Firstly, that it is really from a peace building and conflict perspective that I became engaged in this in the Niger Delta, really, and because of the damage, not just on environmental terms, but in terms of social cohesion and conflict that irresponsible oil and gas production have created. So the package of measures that we're proposing is essentially also not just economic or environmental, but also as a way of addressing the deep social dislocation that has resulted from it. I just want to also acknowledge my sister Hindu in her eloquent, fantastic presentation, which I was desperately writing notes about, because the method that she's describing for community, for assessing and bringing together communities around a common agenda for adaptation and beyond and peace is certainly transferable. And I would like to see how the method can be used in the context of rolling out the recommendations that we're proposing for Bielsa's future. But that's all, I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's Ambassador Ahmed. You have a lot of experience. You have related to peace building in Africa in different countries, and the climate change has been affecting. But now my question to you is for the Northern Africa region. So, and as I don't know if the audience can see that we have representation of all 5 African regions here, and then so now is the time for the North Africa region. So climate change has been affecting African countries. Economy is compromising local people's job. A job is very important, particularly for developing countries. Well, for everybody, the job is important, but developing countries, they have more challenge with that. So could you share a case in North Africa where actions of cooperation have been taken to mitigate or adapt to climate change, to create jobs that contribute to support sustainable peace?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think if you look at North Africa, one of the contrasts with sub-Saharan Africa is the high rate of electrification, actually, and access to energy, and that is an important aspect. If you look, for example, in North Africa, at Egypt and Morocco, you will find that these two countries have massively developed renewable energies over the past 10 years. And I think among the biggest solar plants in the world, we would find in Egypt, in Bimban, south of Cairo, and in Morocco. So the massive scale up of renewable energy is, I mean, the experiences of these countries shows that it's feasible with investments, and then it has also a positive impact on creating jobs. I was just reading that there's an estimate that over the next 20 years, Morocco, for example, will be able to create 400,000 jobs in renewable energies. So this is clearly, we see renewables clearly, for example, as a source of job creation. IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, has done also a lot of work on that. It publishes an annual report on renewable energy and jobs. And of course, I mean, that contributes also to creating then economic opportunity in these countries, in limiting illegal migration, and also potentially also the development of violence, terrorism. So I think this is some of the positive spillovers of tackling climate change, for example, through for example, renewables. But also in terms of adaptation of agriculture, there's a huge also potential of job creation there in terms of smart climate-friendly agriculture, given also the challenges of food security facing in these countries. So there's a lot of opportunity for a job creation in climate adaptation and mitigation that can have a spillover effect, positive spillover effect in terms of the overall stability and sustaining peace agenda. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. We appreciate your contribution. That's important. Now, Dr. Kanta, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. I think we did a wonderful tour. I mean, imagine we heard, you know, from the experience of cooperative measures in Somalia. We heard from Hindu on what amazing things could happen with communities in Chad. And then we heard, of course, from the water issue, how important that issue is. And sometimes it requires already transboundary cooperation in the Orange Senku River Basin from Southern Africa. The learning experience that is still unfolding in Nigeria, in Bayelsa State. And of course, last but not least, from Ambassador Ahmed on sort of the potential for jobs on renewable energy, bearing in mind that we always want to keep a just transition to these job creations and not disenfranchised communities. So what we want to move into now, I think with the discussants a little bit, is probe a little bit, right, into from these stories, are there trends and principles that are emerging from these examples, which are critical to that nexus of climate security and peace, right? What do you see that? I mean, we heard a little bit about knowledge, we heard a little bit about analytics, we heard about governance, but I'd like to hear from you. And this is really now, let's go in the reverse order, right? I know, Ambassador, you just spoke, Ambassador Ahmed. But what do you give us some examples of what you see are the common trends and principles that are emerging from this conversation that you think are so fundamental to that question, right?
Well, thank you. I think one thing that I think appears is that this is a multi-level, multi-sectoral kind of engagement and response that we need. You know, it needs to include the national level and the local level, the regional level. We need to simultaneously work at all these levels, and then we need to simultaneously work cross-sectorally, you know, along climate, water, security, and all of these host of issues. So that is a challenge, because our you know, most of our policies and our programs and the development assistance is not structured along those lines. So there's a need to rethink, redesign our partnerships that bear in these minds, and that once again address and tackle the root causes of vulnerability and fragility. And we there's also to mention that we have not much talked about COVID and how COVID also impacts this landscape and increases and aggravates fragilities and vulnerabilities, and then the resilience you need to face that is a resilience that serves climate and that serves also all these other challenges. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent way to start out. I think recognizing that we really have to understand that linkages, you know, at multiple levels and multiple scales. Dr. Catherine, how about you?
Thank you very much. I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I would very much like to just build on what Ambassador said by reiterating the need to learn lessons from past attempts to join up across sectors, particularly in fragile contexts. There are some important political challenges. And when I say political, I'm referring to the political economy challenges of the system, even in the development, even between development and humanitarian, that are enormous in terms of joined up approaches. So I would make a plea for acknowledging the need for political attention, high-level political attention, to make this cross-sectoral way of working possible. It won't happen because it's the right thing to do. It will happen if there is political energy around it. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that, and perhaps others will speak more eloquently on this, but the bottom-up approach, whilst, as we all know, in anything that has any chance of success, you know, we need to work at it has to be multi-leveled, multi-layered, etc. what I think this conversation has highlighted, and the literature also highlights this, I mean, that bottom-up, local level channeling of finance for this is critical. You know, so rather than presuming that what will happen upstairs will trickle downstairs, we need to revert that and build from below, so that the direction of travel outlined by Hindu is you know, and which seems to make perfect sense. We know as from the peacebuilding community, that's also a lesson that needs to happen. And then just that third thing, I would just one quickly, conflict sensitivity needs to cut across. So the climate space, adaptation and mitigation needs to embed the lessons from the conflict peacebuilding community as conflict sensitivity, so that they do no harm in unintended ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And great points. We'll summarize later. That's good.
Thank you, Kanta. Two maybe outrageous statements. Firstly, by 2050, Africa will not only be the most populous continent on Earth, it will also be the only one that doesn't have an aging population. And I think we must absorb that. The second is that we understand the need to build forward greener in the way we've been talking about. And the only continent on Earth currently that is not firmly embedded in the fossil fuel economy is this continent. This continent has to become the global project around transitioning the global economy into a low carbon economy. This is where the investment needs to be made. These are the people that need to be developed to drive forward a green and sustainable future for the world as a whole, not only this continent. Let me pause there.
Great point. I think that leapfrogging, that opportunity that Africa holds, not having polluted but moving straight into green is a great way to go, Desikan. Over to you, Ambassador Fred, for your sort of high-level common trends and principles that you take away from the conversation so far.
Thank you so much. This conversation has been fascinating and informative on so many ways, because these are the things that we see on a regular basis. But I would like to say something which actually has not been said here. It's the role of governments, right? Our number one challenge for our generation is how to make our governments responsive. One of the challenges that we're faced with right now, and you're seeing it through these military coups and everything that is happening, is because our governments are no longer responsive. And the people feel that just having an election is not enough. They want governments who can attend to their daily needs. And so we need to factor in whether we're going to focus on low carbon economy, whether we're going to focus on how to respond to these crises. We need to focus in on how to have efficient governments. Without efficient governments, all of these things we're talking about will not happen. You'll be surprised. I don't know a single government official who wakes up in the morning saying, I'm going to mess up in my country. But most of the time, they're constantly doing firefighting and trying to catch up, rather than plan well and creating synergies with different government institutions on how they can actually not only prevent some of these crises, but also on how to respond. So I think that the number one thing that we need to also factor in is, how do we make our governments more efficient? If they are not efficient, all that we're talking about will not go anywhere. Second, I think that there needs to be more investment in research and innovation. I think that when you look at the budget of many of our governments, when you look at the amount of money that is given to science education, you will see that it's really, really, really limited. And even this issue of climate, peace, and security, people talk about it, but they don't go too much in depth to really try to understand it. And I think that you do have people like Catherine and others who really focus on this on a regular basis, but we really need to invest in research and education. I think it has been mentioned. Third point, last but not least, we need to invest also in infrastructure, which will help us to mitigate some of these things. I think Ambassador Ahmed is the one who talked about, electrification and all these things. And I think that we are not yet investing enough. And COVID us actually that we were so fragile and so vulnerable. I just came out of a debate where they were talking about the vaccine inequality or vaccine apartheid, depending on how you look at it. And the one question that was on my mind was, why are we talking about this? Why are we not creating our own vaccines? You know, because we don't have responsive governments, because our governments have not invested in research and education. So
Ambassador Fred, I'd really like you to wrap up, because I am very mindful that
sorry about that. That was my last point. That was my last point.
Yes. No, I think you're right. I think there's lessons to learn from COVID that are so relevant and reveal so many inequities and gaps and needs. But I take your point about the governance and the efficiency of government. But over to Indu, who did highlight the critical need of development and food in the stomach. But let's hear your final your point on this big trend, principle, whatever you call it.
Yeah, I think firstly, we all agree that climate change is also driving the insecurity, and suddenly it's going to be more and more because of all these extreme weather events. But I want people to keep that as communities and as vulnerable or countries or in developed or whatever that they can call us. We are not accept to become a victim. We are also a solutions. We do have our own solutions that must be recognized and take into consideration at the same level that the other solution that exists. So we are contributing. They must consider us in this positive note, not in this negative one. And finally, as my sister Akati said here, it is very important to drive the funding to the communities. The system of funding need to change. The community, even they do not know how to fill the Excel sheet of all these reporting measure, but they are delivering. So the fund must be adapted to the need of the communities, not the communities to adapt to the funding that they are designed and giving to us. Thank you.
Excellent point. Let me just, give it back to Octavia, but I want to highlight 5 sort of high-level patterns, trends, principles, whatever you want to call it, Octavio. I mean, the point about multi-level, multi-sectoral, national, regional, global, but that bottom-up, that voice, that point that was made both by Hindu and even earlier by Catherine. And then I think learning from what has happened is critically important, so that we bring that sensitivity to the lessons and to the pathways that I think we'll be talking about. But all is not gloom. I think Desigan's point about the opportunity, is a really important one. And how do we then bring the right kind of action to it? The financing, I think that was also mentioned by others. But governments do continue to have a critical role. How do we hold them accountable, efficient, to serve the communities and to be responsive to that? And of course, we talk about research, but not forgetting like what's driving that insecurity, coming back to the basic idea of, not losing sight of what we're trying to fix and the role for development and financing and jobs within that. So over to you, Octavio, on the next important question on pathways. You're on mute, Octavio.
We are like, in terms of time, we are very short. So I will just ask a question to one of the speakers. And I would, let's see, who am I going to ask? The question is, what pathways can be taken for future projects associated with climate cooperation in Africa that support sustainable peace? I will give two speakers, Kanta to end our conversation. But let's start with 30 seconds, another speaker, a volunteer. I will give volunteer somebody who wanna share a Hindu. Before Hindu, I will give Hindu to finish with 30 seconds and another person to start with the 30 seconds. I volunteer for.
I mean, personally, I think the pathway will be just to give the money where it is needed, and then the people can implement it.
Okay, that's wonderful. So one more to finish.
Maybe just 2 points in your 30 seconds. One is that the cooperation has to become genuinely continental. I mean, the experiment that we had in Southern Africa with the Southern African Power Pool should be organized to be continent-wide. This is the way we're going to get the best efficiencies around moving to a renewable energy frame. And secondly, we got to make our continental free trade agreement work and empower African development.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Catherine, 15 seconds.
Oh, I don't think I
It's
can
okay.
add. I think everybody has said it. I want to just highlight what Ambassador Ngonga said about the African Union and ensuring that we're all aware of what is being trialed there in this direction, you know, on climate and security. And also, I'd want to acknowledge what Ambassador Abdelatif also said, which was, you know, about Morocco and how job creation in the renewable energy sector is a way forward. I mean, for me, that was a kind of a lightning moment. And I think we really need to, that continent-wide cooperation is critical. I mean, there are solutions in our grasp. We have to share them.
That's good. So Ambassador Ngonga, 10 seconds for you. Last 10 seconds, please.
Yeah, I think everything has been said, but for me, I just want to build on what Nadu said about the Continental Free Trade Agreement. But you cannot have the Continental Free Trade Agreement if you don't have free movement of people and goods. And this also, by the way, applies to the challenges we're faced with right now with climate change. There will be movement of people, but it has to be organized and it has to be there. And we cannot want one thing and it's contrary. And you know, we need to turn our borders from barriers to bridges and ensure that actually people can trade, people can move around. This will also avoid us some of these conflicts, like the pastoralist versus farmer one. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. We have only 3 minutes left. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Oh, Ambassador.
No,
Ambassador,
I wanted to say something. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, Ambassador.
No. If just in 10 seconds. I mean, my key message is that it is not about having a project here, a project there. The magnitude of this challenge for Africa requires massive redesign of policies, of financing, etc. We need to think big scale about this, right? In terms of our public policies, in terms of our governance, in terms of resilience, in terms of financing. Micro level approaches are not enough to deal with this challenge. So we need to think big, and we have a lot of good ideas and creativity in Africa to do that. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Ambassador. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we have a space of like for maybe 3 minutes for 1 or 2 questions, probably 1 question. So let's give the time opportunity for the audience to ask questions, and then Kanta can handle this. Thank you. Fabien, do you have questions?
Yes, we have a question in the chat from Matt Kanta, if you want to take it.
Oh, okay. There's a question from Matt Schweitzer to everyone. I'm curious about the ecological effect of renewables, what the ecological effect of renewables is, and whether extractive industries for renewables create more socio-ecological conflicts and how to address it. So this is really speaking to the extractive industries, which we know that there are sort of critical minerals that are required for renewables, right? Like lithium and others. And, whether that wouldn't lead to more conflict. I'm not sure who wants to answer the question, but it's an important one because some countries in Africa sit on a gold mine of these minerals. How can we make sure that we don't end up in another route of conflict and crisis, and where the resources the benefits don't go to the countries or the communities? I would not know who wants to answer it, but maybe Desigan, Ambassador Ahmed, anyone for the matter.
Yeah.
Maybe Hindu. Ambassador, go ahead.
I mean, if I just think and say quickly, I mean, the ecological effect of renewables at the end of the day is much lower than fossil fuel industries. And we've seen in a lot of areas of Africa, the conflicts relating to fossil fuels and the negative impact on communities. And I think there is a lot of work being done in the extractive industries to try to make sure that they operate also on a more kind of sustainable ground. So I think there is also movement and awareness on the side of extractive industries to tackle some of these issues. Yeah. So that just in a short answer.
Just a quick add to that, just to repeat, paraphrasing Carlos Lopez, who was former executive secretary of the UNECA, who said that, African oil and gas has powered a northern revolution and northern prosperity in the fossil fuel era. Let us ensure that our minerals do not empower once again a renewable energy driven development in the north without getting the benefit on this continent at the same time.
Very well said, and couldn't say it better. It really remains for Octavio and me, and of course the organizers, to thank all of you. This is an extremely complex and difficult conversation. But in this very short time, I think all of you have really opened our eyes even further into not just the magnitude of the issue, but the kind of solutions that we have to pursue. I think that the climate crisis is unleashing, and it's really going to hit Africa hardest and the poor the most. Conflicts, unfortunately, are also, on the rise. But, there is that sort of glimmer of hope that sometimes we have to take and now take it really strongly. The opportunity that was laid out in terms of Africa leapfrogging, in terms of the nuggets of how communities bringing that information together, bringing that solution space together, must be given the voice, must be given the financing in a way that they can uptake it towards broader and bigger sustainable communities and peace. And understanding the issue cannot go away, and we must invest in that, and we must do that clearly. But at the same time, we have to ramp up our action, as the ambassador said, and ramp it up at scale with the kind of transformation. And we must therefore work with the global community and actually call the global community to do part of their action and their response in terms of particularly of financing, but with full voice and accountability to the continent through their own processes and continent-wide, but always engaging the communities who are both impacted, but also are not just victims, as I think it was Hindu who said, and they have solutions to offer. So let me just pass it back to Octavio, but it was really our privilege to hear from you and share with you. We're sorry we didn't have more time for questions and answers, but this is not the end of a conversation. It's a continuation of very complex, but really important conversation. So over to you, Octavio, for the last word.
Thank you, Kanta. We don't have much time. I will just end. Thank you for joining us. It was really a privilege for me to co-chair this with you. I'm learning a lot here with you. And thank you also to all our discussants. We have discussants from all 5 African regions: North, West, East, Central, and the Southern Africa region. And so that was wonderful. We are very grateful for this, for their participation with us. We have, but as Kanta said, this is not the end of it. We have the Africa Interest Group of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association. Please make sure to check in the website or email me, octaviogoyo@gmail.com, if you want to learn or join the Africa Interest Group. Please thank you again for Carlos, our president, and for all the group who helped us in this planning team. So all participants, we are very happy that you joined us. That's I would say that's very nice of you to join us. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And then good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I would say in my language, in my native language, Walange. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.